everybody, and welcome back on into Conversations. I'm your host, Drew Patrick, and today I am very excited to be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Brad Lint. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Drew.
And yes, the reason I said the man, the myth, the legend is you have quite the life story. Honestly, quite the extreme, incredible life story up to this point in your life. And I want to talk about it. Obviously, here at Mansfield, some of the things you teach include foreign languages. And I want to talk about, because I read an article about you, and what was it about Mandarin and the Chinese culture that really drew you in?
That's not an easy question. I should add too that I did offer Chinese 1. We unfortunately weren't able to hold that class because the enrollment wasn't high enough. But yeah, I have taught Chinese in the past, and I still do continue to in some way, shape, or form. I guess what oddly enough started the interest for me was martial arts. Back in, a long time ago, I started studying Chinese martial arts and realized there was a lot to it. I had studied Taekwondo before, but Chinese martial arts in particular, just very different sort of style, and I became interested in the sort of philosophy behind it. So I started reading a little bit about Taoism and Buddhism and so forth, and I got interested in it, and it turned out in college, I needed a gen ed, a second literature class of all things, and they were all filled. So they said my only option was to take another language, and looked through the catalog, and I saw Chinese 1. I was a junior by then already, and I took it, and it changed my life. I loved it. And I took Chinese 1, Chinese 2, and then I'd only done maybe 2 years of it as an undergraduate before I decided to sell everything I owned, put on a backpack, and head off to Asia.
Yes, and we will get to that definitely. But you went to college with a plan in your mind of what you wanted to do, and then you make this pivot. Was there a specific moment at school that you knew, or what was it at school before you took this class that you had to take for your gen ed that you ultimately thought, you know what? I really like this. I might want to make a switch. Was it not liking your current major, or where was that switch in your head?
I don't know if it was a sudden pivot. It was sort of building for a few years. And you're right about having the plan. I had a plan. I was dead set on pre-law and law school. That was my plan from early high school years even. So I got to the University of Pittsburgh, where I did my undergraduate, and they didn't have pre-law, but they had political science. So I majored in political science, and my focus was on international relations. So I did a lot in the time with Soviet, right, and Chinese relations. And my professor said, if you're really going to do this, you need to learn the languages. And I said, you mean Russian and Chinese? And they said yes. So I did Russian fairly early on. Got up to newspaper, magazine translation, and poetry, and I think I was something like 3 or 6 credits shy of a second BA in Russian.
Oh, wow.
Except the second literature course in Russian, the one where we read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in Russian, just killed me. I couldn't do it. And then a little later on, I had started Chinese. But the strange thing that happened was I was so gung-ho about my major that I completed all the major requirements in 3 years. So my last year was really the gen eds. So that's, a little bit junior year and some senior year. So it was almost all gen eds. So I started Chinese language. I took courses in Chinese language and literature. And then basically what I found was I loved this a lot more than I did, studying IR and international relations theory. So it wasn't really so much of a pivot as, I wonder what would have happened if I'd started my gen eds earlier in my college career. I was kind of putting them off, and that's what changed my life right there.
So you stay in Pittsburgh for your graduate, going to Carnegie Mellon.
I worked at Carnegie Mellon.
Worked at Carnegie Mellon.
And I started graduate school at the University of Pittsburgh, first in Russian and then in information science. They actually accepted me into the master's program in Russian, even though I didn't have the BA. But I was close enough. But it was a funding issue, so I did not stick with either program, actually.
But you got an interesting piece of advice, though, at your time at Carnegie Mellon, which was if you really want to learn, is to get immersed in the culture.
Yeah, that's that. Yep.
How important was that conversation or that piece of advice to you to then decide to proceed?
It was life-changing. And it was an old friend. It was a friend of mine from Chinese 1 at Pitt, and he had finished his degree and left and went to Taiwan, where he was studying Chinese. At the time, China wasn't really open yet. Now everybody goes to China to learn Chinese. At the time, in the 80s, Taiwan was the major option because they had the long-standing programs. He just came back and he saw me and said, "So, what are you still doing here?" And then he told me about his life living abroad and how he was teaching English and studying Mandarin and traveling around Asia. And he just basically sat down and wrote down a number on a sheet of paper. And I said, "What is this?" And he said, if you can get this sum together, that would be the price of a one-way ticket to Taiwan. We still have college classmates who are over there now that I could put you in touch with. And you could really be, you could try it out for a while. And I thought, I just kind of come out of grad school, wasn't happy with it. It wasn't working for me. I was in a job that really wasn't doing it for me. I was helping automate systems in the library at Carnegie Mellon. And that was, it was going well. I just was it wasn't what I wanted to do. After law school idea went away and grad school didn't seem to be what I wanted. I thought, well, why not? I went home that night and did some math. And I think I was on a plane in 2 weeks.
Wow. So yeah, I read you sold what you needed for that one-way ticket. That had to be, so obviously, I don't want to say if you had cold feet at any point, but after you had done this and got on the plane and was sitting there for however long it was, did you have doubts in your head at all?
I had cold feet all along. Oh. This was terrifying. I think I was 24. I had been to Canada. I think that was my one experience outside of the United States. And I love the languages. I really, really enjoyed. I started with Spanish, then it was the Russian, then Chinese, and I really loved it. Our professor at Pitt had said, though, if you really want to learn a language, you're not going to do it here as well as you would in an immersive environment. So he was always encouraging us to go. So I had 13 college classmates who went over there after their first or second year as a study abroad for either a semester or 6 months. Some that did that came back, graduated, and then went back to live and work. I always had cold feet. And then it felt a little bit like jumping into a canyon, leaping off a cliff. Because I sold all my furniture. I found somebody to take over my lease for my apartment. I sold my car. I got rid of everything. Basically, everything I owned was in a backpack. And I put a few boxes together at my parents' place, like my old punk records and things like that, which I'm glad I hung on to after all these years. And then I got on the plane, and I remember it was a friend of mine who was going to meet me at the airport when I got to Taiwan. And so except for knowing that vaguely that there's someone on the other end of this flight, I think I transferred in Seoul, Korea, and then I landed at the airport in Taiwan, and there was my buddy to meet me, crashed at his place for a couple of weeks, and just funny how things worked out from there on. But yeah, absolutely. It was terrifying, but also I can't imagine not having done it.
Absolutely. I've heard people talk about, especially when they go and visit, culture shock, but there has to be culture shock to a magnitude that you jumped in. Describe, if you can, that initial culture shock, those first couple of weeks in Taiwan, just the true mindset of yours.
I'm very lucky I had friends there. In particular, a few that I knew well. Yeah, I mean, Taiwan is about a quarter the size of Pennsylvania, with double the population. It's about 20 million people, and most live on this sort of narrow strip that runs down the west coast because the center is mountainous, and then there are a few cities on the east as well. So population density. I think at the time they were saying population, that Taiwan had the highest population density and the second highest in the world next to Bangladesh. So I wasn't used to, coming from Western Pennsylvania and growing up not in the city of Pittsburgh, but just outside. I had never seen this many people before. The Tropic of Cancer cuts across the bottom third of the island, so it's subtropical above that and tropical below. So the heat. I went in May, and I thought, "Wow, what is this? What is this going to be like?" And this, the number of people, the heat, the humidity, and the language. I had done a year or two of Mandarin. I was lucky to have an amazing professor, Dale Barnes at the University of Pittsburgh. Was really amazing. He worked really hard on our pronunciation and our use of tones in Chinese. So I didn't know how to say much, but my classmates sort of all had the same experience. We couldn't say much, but what we said sounded correct. I mean, it sounded like proper Mandarin, which is difficult to do. And so people would always assume we knew more than we did. And so I would say my 2 or 3 sentences, and then bam, I'm awash in Mandarin, having no idea what's going on. At a couple points, I remember someone would come up and speak to me and be talking, and I really wasn't understanding anything they were saying. And I just turned to my friend and I said, "I feel like such a failure." I was studying Chinese for years here, 2 years, and which I thought was a lot compared to 30 now. It's nothing. But I said it seemed like, and I just said, "I feel like such a failure." And he looked at me and he said, "She's not speaking Mandarin to you. She's speaking the local dialect." Which is totally different, and I had no idea. So that's how little I knew when I got there. So yeah, it was difficult. It was good to have a few friends. It was nice to have a few places to hang out that we all went to. A few of our famous, bars, pubs, the tea houses, that sort of thing, where we would congregate. And very quickly, I was teaching, and very quickly in Mandarin classes. So I started meeting more people and locals as well, and things started to change. But yeah, those first, I want to say, few months were nerve-wracking and thrilling at the same time, because it was exciting. It was wonderful. Everything was an adventure. It was a daily exploration, and there was something new and something to learn almost every day.
And was the goal, especially early in those first couple of months, to try and completely eliminate English, or did you still have it with like your friends and whatnot, but trying to use it as little as possible? I guess the question that I'm trying to ask is, what was the percentage of Mandarin to English that you were speaking in those early months?
That's a good question. I very quickly met people that were expat, we say expatriate, people that sort of move abroad and live their lives out there or work for a company for many years and so forth. I met a lot of expats who had been there for a very long time and learned very little Mandarin, because that was possible. We had 2 English newspapers. At the time, we had 3 TV channels, and one of them had English programming late at night, so you could watch, at the time, Twin Peaks in reruns at night. So that's the only television we really had. And I think they had Three's Company as well in reruns. So all the best, right? And a lot of the entertainment, movies, a lot of Hollywood movies, a lot of local as well, but a lot of Hollywood. So it was possible to sort of put yourself in an English bubble. And I think that's possible in a lot of places when you travel abroad. So I did kind of make an effort to not do that all the time. So I tried to spend more time outside of class speaking Chinese. Working, I thought, the whole purpose of coming there was the environment. And what really changed for me was working. I started working full time in a Chinese office. That changed everything. The classes alone, you could go to 2 hours of class a day, and that was the standard: 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. So it's 10 hours a week, and that is good. But if you don't use it outside the class, you just don't absorb as much. And I took a job working as the academic director of a chain of English schools in Taiwan, 100 schools actually. Started with doing editing and writing for the textbooks, and then moved into teacher education and that sort of thing. But my coworkers were almost all speaking Chinese all day long, every day. When the novelty wore off, because when I was the one foreigner in the office, people would try to speak English with me, but then it just was easier to speak their native language. So I was the one who had to push and learn. So I found, hey, I could try out this thing that I learned in class today. And then I found out, oh, people don't really say that, or this is how they do say that. And then I could then ask my teacher the next day, hey, I heard this thing. And she'd say, yeah, that's a good thing for you guys to learn. And she would do it. Or she would point at me and say, stop learning outside the classroom. I'm your teacher. It changed, in other words. In the beginning, I think I was speaking a lot more English. And then after a while, and especially when I was working full time, and I did have some coworkers from Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, England, from all over. But I spent most of the day speaking Chinese because I simply had to. And that's where that sort of percentage, I can't even estimate what it would have been, really changed. Over the years, it got to a point where, I was there for 16 years. I went for 6 months originally. But after a period there, I would go a while without speaking English, to the point where sometimes I would look in the mirror and get a little bit of a shock. So it did change over time, and really did eventually become pretty immersive. And remember, this was pre-internet, pre-Zoom, and all. So we didn't have some of the language possibilities that we have now with the internet. I mean, we didn't have cell phones. We had landlines with cords, so and like I said, TV with 3 channels, and we had one English radio station. So it became more and more immersive as time went on.
Do you think it was just the opportunities you got that turned the 6 months into 16 years, or what was it that kept you there?
At the end of my first year, I think my boss got the sense I was ready to go home. I hadn't been home for a while. I had already stretched past the 6 months. It hit me very quickly that Chinese was not something you master in a semester or two. I was thinking that way because so many of my classmates had gone for a semester, or stayed on for a year, right? Nobody did, but I started meeting people who'd been there like 5 years. And that was inconceivable at the time. I was like, wait, no. This was my little adventure abroad, right? I was going to go learn a little bit and come back home. But I had finished college. I was done. Some of my classmates weren't. They had to go home. So where I didn't have that pressure that they did. And at the same time, I was looking at, the kind of work I was doing before I went to Taiwan. So I think my boss kind of sensed what was happening, and things like I was missing, stepping, crunching fall leaves and snow, things that don't exist over there in a subtropical climate. My boss sat me down and said, look, here is what I would like to propose to you. And towards the end of my first year, I'd fallen a little bit off with the classes, the English classes. And this was, I wasn't full time yet. She offered me the full time position as academic director of their system of schools. And she said, here's the salary that I'm willing to give you. And I'm going to give you release time every day in the morning, 2 hours in the morning, to go to what at the time was considered the top Mandarin training program in Taiwan. It was the National Taiwan Normal University, Shifan Daxue, the Guoyu Zhongxin. It was the Chinese, the Mandarin Training Center, MTC. I couldn't remember the English acronym of this university. 8 to 10 every day. So I was doing martial arts in the morning in the park with my teacher. I was usually out there by 6. Would get home, grab a shower, run to class from 8 to 10, get back home, change, go to work, and then work until 8 o'clock at night. And that continued for quite a long time. So I stayed there I did that for years. And then at the same time traveling, exploring other work opportunities. I worked for an ad agency for a while. I was a TV game show host. I played a priest in a soap opera. I did voiceovers. I mean, there other opportunities started popping up. So I think opportunity was a big part of it, but also that lack of constraint. I didn't feel like I had to come home. I still came home to visit. And that was great. I loved coming home, usually for Christmas, then sometimes in the summer, because I missed home terribly. But at the same time, I felt like I had more opportunities and more of a possibility to grow and develop where I was and doing what I loved to do.
Actually, you bring up an interesting point, though, when you would come back. Being so accustomed and getting immersed in the culture, as you will, did you get somewhat of a culture shock then coming back to the U.S.?
Absolutely. Now, I didn't really feel it until I moved back. And I think that's part of, when we talk about culture shock, Clairvaux Oberg back in the 1950s coming up with this idea of the honeymoon phase and the adjustment phase, and he included reentry shock. But the thing is, that honeymoon phase, when everything's wonderful and exotic and new, well, that also applies to reentry shock. So if you're only coming home for a week or two, everything's great. Oh, look at all the food. Oh, there's snow on the ground. Oh, here's the Christmas tree. I get to see some of my friends again, even though a lot of us lost touch over the years pre-internet. It was still a honeymoon reentry. It wasn't until I really moved back when, it hit me hard. The longer I was back, for a week or 2 week stint, it didn't really affect me at all in the beginning.
Wow. So I want to talk about those opportunities. You mentioned a bunch of them, and I want to talk about a bunch of them. I want to start with, all of a sudden, game shows start to come knocking at your door. How in the world did this happen?
The language school that I worked for was invited to participate in a game show called Baijian Baishen, which was 100 arrows, like 100 shots, 100 victories. And it was just a game show. If you've ever seen, there was a Japanese show called MXC that ran for a while. It's already been a while ago that it was in reruns here. And it was, obstacles, ridiculous obstacle courses and things that you had to go through. So they pitted one language school against another language school. And this was, and it was a fun idea, and it was very silly. And there were things like one person on our team had to put on a Velcro suit and swing out and try to land on a Velcro wall. And so we had one guy on our team. He's like, "I'll do it." He was all excited about it. He hit the wall, fell off, and did the dead man float in the water just on purpose. And the crew got all concerned, and everybody was looking at him, and then he came up out of the water and goes, I'm okay. And then I had to put on a giant turtle suit and hop up a hill while they rolled these giant foam boulders down at me.
Holy cow.
And in a big turtle suit, if a boulder clips you, you're going down. And don't ask me how. I somehow got all the way to the top. Nobody else did, but I did. And then the next game was to swing on a rope out over this really nasty-looking water and land on an inflatable mushroom. I went into the water.
Oh, no.
But I told the next guy, I said, hey, when you go out, let go as soon as you're over it, because that's what I should have done. I held on too long. So he did that, and he landed on it. So our team won. And then I think they picked up that I could speak a little Mandarin. You know, it wasn't great. I was still working at it. I was still taking classes. And I had business cards that I'd made up. So they said, could we get one of your cards? So I just passed them out. I didn't think anything about it. I just passed the cards out. And a couple weeks later, my phone started ringing. With, hey, could you come to our studio and do such and such thing for our game show? And it was mostly segments of game shows and so forth. And then an acting opportunity came up. And then I did a lot of voiceovers too for toy companies and for English textbooks. And so they used to put a CD in with the English textbook, and that would be the one where you play the CD and it says something like, open your books to page 17. Are you ready? Let's go. And that was me. So, and that all came out of this ridiculous game show that we were on.
First of all, I love that. But I want to go to one of the opportunities that I read was pretty much a Chinese version of like Punk'd that they had you do. That was one of the things I read. That seems absolutely insane.
Would you like me to send you the video clip?
It's
on YouTube. It's not subtitled. But they brought me on. I never knew what we were going to do from week to week. They usually didn't tell me, and I was fine with that. I'm not sure if they weren't writing it until the last minute or they didn't want me to know what they were doing. But I would show up and they would just tell me whatever the gag was for that day. They invited me one day and they put me in a tux. Very tight. I mean, so small tux. It didn't fit me well at all. And they said, today we'd like you to pretend you don't speak a word of Mandarin and that you're a champion knife thrower. And I'm like, okay, all right. I think I could, and I said, what else do you want me to know? They're like, nothing. You don't need to know anything else. Just pretend you're a knife thrower and just roll with it. And I came out on the stage. They introduced me as this knife thrower, and I just started making up how I was performing around the world, and I had recently been in, whatever city and so forth. And one of the guys on the set was translating from the English into Mandarin because I was acting like I didn't understand anything they were saying. So it turns out they had this young singer. Her name was He Yuan. The Winnie, I think, was her English name. And they basically, strapped her to this big board and blindfolded her and said I was supposed to throw knives at her. Now, I knew that I wasn't really going to be throwing any knives, so I had no idea what was going on. But, I'd done a little bit of acting, so I was hamming it up as best I could. And at one point, they said, do you want her to wear a blindfold? And they said, why? And I said, well, look, every magician and knife thrower knows the person you're throwing knives at has to have a blindfold on, because if they see the knife coming, they're going to dodge and then risk getting injured. And I just made that up. I have no idea about how any of this works. But I guess before the show, they had told the singer that it wasn't, there was no risk of injury or anything. And she heard me say this, now thinks it's real because I guess it was convincing. And she started crying, basically. And then I'm still not really sure what's going on. Well, the gag was they blindfolded her, and they're supposed to 3, 2, 1. They put on the eerie music, and the host is standing right next to her with knives. And he just sticks the knife in the board. So to her, she can't see. It feels like I'm throwing knives. And we go through the entire sequence of this, and then finally they put fruit on her head. I'll just have to show you the video for that part.
Wow.
And then I actually ran into her a few weeks later at a pub. Somebody walked up and slugged me in the arm. And I turned around and it was her, this big smile on her face. And she said, you. I said, look, I didn't know I was just going with it. But she laughed about it. She thought it was funny after the fact. But I saved that. It was not very good quality, but I have I'll share the link with you.
Was that the most, I guess, insane is the word I'm looking for, most insane thing that they had you do?
By far. It was a table with knives. And at one point, the host said, we want to see how skilled you are. Can you show us a little something here? And I said, yeah, put your hand down and spread your fingers out. And I held a knife up. And he was like, no, 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 no. He knew. The host knew it wasn't real. And there's no way he was going to do that. And I said, well, no, it's a quick demonstration. I won't hurt you. And I said, really? And he just, that was no, he wouldn't do it. So, but it was very, so real knives, in this sort of situation. Yeah, that was pretty crazy. The other stuff was pretty tame by comparison.
Wow. So I want to go back to the voiceover stuff you talked about. Now, was this them having you do voiceover in English or voiceover in Chinese?
English. Yeah, entirely in English. They always had the professionals who would do the voiceovers in Mandarin and we would work together in some cases. But this was almost always work where they needed a tagline in English. There was still a lot of English in advertising. Mm-hmm. So typically at the end of an advertisement, you might say something like, "It's good, Panasonic." Something like that. Or there'd be a little line somewhere. And for English textbooks and for toys and this sort of thing, many of which were produced at factories in Taiwan or in China with management from Taiwan and so forth. So yeah, it was 99% English. Occasionally there would be something in Mandarin, but almost always English.
Did you ever notice that your voice was coming out of something that you're like, oh, that's me? Was there a product or a commercial or anything that you saw where your voiceover work went?
Well, the commercials were on TV all the time, so I would hear that. I also ended up with a few books with the CD in it that I had done the narration of, and it doesn't. I think everybody feels this way when you hear your own voice come back to you. It just doesn't sound right. So I always was a little reluctant to hear this, especially when it popped on the TV or something like that. And the only time I ever came across anything just randomly was a Marvin the Martian toy that I had done the voice for. So as we used to do, we didn't just do, not everything was a straight up radio voice. Sometimes we did different voices. Mm-hmm. So that way the dialogues that we would read and so forth would sound like they had hired a whole bunch of people. That's how these recording studios got off cheaply, to try to convince people they had. So the person that I worked with, she could do 7 or 8 voices, and I would do 7 or 8 voices, and sometimes just crack each other up. Doing this in dialogues, and we would just, put on a slightly different voice. And I used to do a couple cartoon voices. So they actually had a Marvin the Martian toy, and they wanted me to read the line, "Take me to your leader." And I said, "Do you know what this is? I mean, this is Marvin from Bugs Bunny." And they didn't seem to know. And this was the recording studio. And I said, "Were you just going to put some random 'Take me to your leader' in this toy? It would be weird." And they said, "Well, do you know how to?" I was like, "I guess I could kind of." So I went, "Take me to your leader." And that ended up in the toy, and I found it on a shelf one day, and I was like, "Oh, dear Lord, that's me."
Did you get it? Or were you like, "No, I can't"?
I didn't buy it, no. Maybe I should have, but at the time I thought, no. And it's one of those things where you hear it, you know it. It's not like your name is anywhere on the toy or anything. You just happen to be, you had some part of it. It's like people that develop an app or something and say, "Hey, yeah, I did this I made that little icon or something like that." That's no big deal. It was just kind of funny.
Wow. Me doing this, I listen to my voice all the time, and I'm with you with I'm at the point I don't like listening to my own voice, but I couldn't imagine doing that voice, those types of voiceover work, and then being in a store and being like, "That is my voice coming out of that." That's incredible. I want to pivot too, because since we're on in terms of show, I want to talk about your stardom in soap operas.
One time. It was just once.
Hey, I mean, it's quite an experience, though. Talk a little bit about how that opportunity came to be for you.
Well, an English teacher a local, Taiwanese teacher of English that was going to an area university. We just kept in touch, and she called me out of the blue one day. After she stopped teaching English, she did her dream was to write for television. So she was a script writer for a soap opera, and they needed an actor. They wanted a foreigner who could speak. Well, originally they wanted a foreigner who could speak the Taiwanese dialect. And I know a little of the dialect, some phrases. I can't really hold a conversation, but she asked me if I'd be interested, and I said, "What would it involve?" She said, "It's not the lead in this, but you'd be in several episodes, and we would need you to come out to set, get you in makeup and costume and everything, and play a priest." And I thought, well, why not, right? I had done everything else, and I thought, it's kind of like the people who are like, I'd like to direct now. This is me doing the, fake knife throwing and going, I'd like to act now. This was my move to becoming serious, right? But it was a really interesting experience. It was fascinating. But yeah, it was just in Chinese we often say guanxi. It doesn't really have a really good translation, but it might be maybe networking or who you know, and the connections. And it's very important in Chinese culture. It's very difficult to get things done unless you know someone. And so that's how the TV stuff originally happened. That's how the radio and voice stuff happened. And that's how the soap opera happened as well. It was who I knew. And they called me.
Hey, I mean, it's a good piece of advice that I'm sure you give your students too, to network and to make those connections, because you never know.
Right.
You never know the opportunities that you're going to have.
Exactly.
The other step that I saw about you is you yourself are also a musician.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk to you about that aspect of being over there and performing for when you can. Again, with connections, I'm guessing, and how to open those doors for different spots for you. Talk a little bit about those experiences that you had.
Sure. I started out a long time ago with piano, keyboards, moved to guitar, didn't know what I was doing, still can't read music on a guitar, but played a lot and played for fun, basically. And when I got to Taiwan, I had a guitar there, and actually a couple guitars there, and I was out at a pub. It was an Aborigine. There are 9 tribes of Aborigines in Taiwan, and I was at an Aborigine pub in Taipei, and somebody was up there singing and doing an acoustic gig. And they, I just offhandedly, I think we're having a drink or something, and I just mentioned, I play a little bit too, and he said, "Would you come up and do a song?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So I got up and did. I don't even remember what it was, but it was just an acoustic folk song or something. And the owner of the bar came over and said, "Is there more where that came from?" And I said, "There could be." and, he said, "Why don't you come in for maybe a short set, next Saturday or something?" So, I had to get gear, a plug-in acoustic, and some other stuff, and I took it in, and I did a set for him, and I think I did some some folk songs, and then I threw in a couple Chinese songs. I thought, why not? I'd learned them, a few pop songs, and I don't know if it was the novelty of seeing a foreigner up there singing in Chinese, and people seemed to have fun, and I was enjoying myself, so I stayed there for I think I gigged there for 2 or 3 years. And and then pretty soon I had my own full gig, and so I would do a 2 hour set or so. And if somebody was in that played hand drums or something, I'd bring them up, and we'd play together for a little while. And sometimes they would close the front gate, and we would pass the guitar around, and everybody would do a song until the sun came up. And it was a blast. I had a lot of fun. And then I would start throwing things in, throw in an occasional Chinese song, throw in a Taiwanese dialect song, throw in a Japanese song, throw in a folk song in Russian. So it's kind of a multilingual set, and a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
That seems, I'd go to that show. That seems like a lot of fun. So ultimately, in 2007, you decide, I'm going to move back to the U.S. Ultimately, in your mind, what was it that you knew that it's time to move back?
A combination of factors, and it built slowly. And partly, I was married. I married a Taiwanese woman, and we had two kids. So one was born in 2001, and the other in 2006. And I was starting to think about education systems and how I was really hoping that that they could go to school here in the U.S. So part of it was family. A second part of it was my parents, which in the 90s when I was living abroad, and I would come back for a visit. I had a sense that I was still able to keep up that connection and see them, but I really missed the regular contact with them. And my parents weren't part of my kids' lives, and that seemed unfortunate, that they didn't have my parents as grandparents to grow up and know and spend time with. So those were both factors, and another factor was I was coming back and forth for graduate school. For many, many, many years. And at one point, I'd even come back for 6 months. I'd come back for a year and so forth. And I was, by that point, finished with courses for my doctorate and was in the dissertation phase. And it was getting harder and harder to do that research and do that writing on the other side of the planet. At one point, for my advisor, I was taking my draft chapters, FedExing them to him, and then he would read them, write comments on them, send them back to me, international mail, right? I would get them, I'd make the changes, they would go back to have the rest of the committee look at it, who would make comments and send them back to me. Well, one got lost in the mail. Oh. And we're talking a 50-page chapter that I'd spent, 6 months writing. And I did end up getting it. I forget how long it was. Was it a year later almost? And it was in a clear package pouch with these labels on it that it had been shipped to Tehran in Iran rather than Taiwan. Wow. And I don't know how somebody made that mistake, but apparently it looked like it had been opened several times, maybe inspected, customs or God knows what. I don't know, maybe it'd been nice if they'd written some comments, giving me some direction for improvement or something. But apparently it languished in post offices in Iran for months and months and months. I was like, I can't do this. This is my degree. So the combination, parents, family, finished the degree, 2007, we made the move, and lock, stock, and barrel brought everything back to the United States. So
then you got into teaching here in PA, and you started in Western PA at IUP, so still familiar area. And then you look down and you see this job here at Mansfield. What was it about this job that you said, that might be a place I want to go?
Well, the intervening one was I also taught up at Penn State Behrend, Erie, Pennsylvania for a few years. I saw a job listing. My background when it comes to literature is world literature. And maybe that makes sense, right? So, Chinese language and literature, as well as Japanese, Indian literature, and so forth, and what we call global Anglophone literature, right? Which would be literature that's written in English, but not in the United States or England. You think of all the countries around the world. You have 196 countries in the world, and you've got maybe 50 some that still speak English as a native language, and another 20 some territories. So including Barbados and Trinidad and Nigeria and Botswana and Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and so forth. So this is what I was doing in addition to the world literature in translation. And that would be, say Chinese literature, Japanese, East Asian mostly. That was my focus. And I just came across a job description at Mansfield University, and it said, somebody who could teach world literature, preferably Chinese, and has some experience teaching composition or English writing, which of course I've been teaching for a very, very long time. And I was like, is this real? And I sent it to a friend of mine, and he said, this it sounds like somebody almost wrote like a description for you or something. He was joking, and I thought, well, I said, it sounds like exactly what I do. And then I thought, well, hey, I've got to see what the possibilities are. And to be honest, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, traveled a bit. I had never really been to the northern tier of Pennsylvania. And I hadn't really even been to Philly either. And everybody said, hey, you're Pennsylvania. My ancestors, came over there, off the boats and so forth. But I hadn't really spent any time there. So I applied for the job, and next thing I know, I was interviewing. And, at first I thought, is the job description real? Then I came here for my interview, and I saw the campus, and I was like, the area is just gorgeous. It's just beautiful. In fact, on my way to the interview, I'd heard about Pine Creek Gorge, but had never been there. And so on the way to my interview, I stopped there to go take a look just to see. And I wandered out. I was looking down over the Leonard Harrison, looking down into the gorge. Like, this is just amazing. And I was almost late to my own interview because I stopped there. And then the people that I met, sort of the same thing, was a very sort of family feel among the faculty. And I'd come from a place most recently where it wasn't really like that, but I just got this tremendous sense of how close people were. And even during the time that we went for lunch and so forth, I thought, wow, I said, this is an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing campus. It's an absolutely amazing group of people. So I was hoping. I went back home, and I was just hoping and praying I'd get a phone call, and I did. And that was almost 8 years ago.
So, with your life and your career, as kind of incredible as it's been now at Mansfield, what has been your favorite accomplishment here at the university, here at Mansfield, in your time teaching here? What do you think your biggest and most important accomplishment would be? I know it's a big and loaded question, but with the incredible steps and opportunities you've had here at Mansfield, what was that moment?
Drew, you're right. That's I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I could answer that question. It's a huge question. There are a lot of things over the years, I think, that have been really important here, but nothing. It's really hard to define something that's individual. So I think that's one of the bright spots of Mansfield University. One of its greatest successes is collaboration. And the way people work together. So I think I'm prouder and happier about things that I've been part of, that I've worked with people to develop. One, for example, would be the professional writing concentration in the English major at Mansfield University. We had a professional writing concentration where I came from at Penn State Barron most recently. And I don't remember if I even had it foregrounded on my resume that I'd worked a little bit with this, but somebody just offhandedly said, do you know anything about professional writing? I thought, well, I taught it for years, and I thought I could maybe help to develop this new concentration. So we created new courses. We created this, there already was a professional writing course. We created a course in copy editing, and we created a course that I now teach called Writing for the Web and Social Media. And to me, I look at the current generation does probably more writing than any generation in history. I mean, we're constantly writing, and I count texting and even Snapchat, I count a lot of this as writing, and certainly status updates and Instagram captions and so forth. And I thought, well, for writers today, to graduate without that skill set might be a problem. They should know something about user experience. They should know something about what personas and scenarios are, and how to create a website. And I'm not talking about coding, even though that's a kind of writing. I'm talking here about style and the way you write for an audience, and that they are foremost in your mind. So helping to create that concentration, which is doing really well for us, I'm happy to be doing that. And probably the other biggest accomplishment would be the China 1-to-1 program here at Mansfield University. And that's where we have been partners with a consortium in China since 2007. And we bring students over from China. They do their first year at their Chinese university, their sophomore, junior year with us, and then they return to China for their senior year. And I coordinate that program here for Mansfield. And as a result of that, I meet with delegations. I usually go to China at least once a year. I go down to DC for meetings with the consortium. I'm there for the graduation and conference, usually with Provost John Ulrich. And that's been a wonderful opportunity. And it's been wonderful to have the support of our president, Charles Patterson, as well as many other faculty and staff here at the university, without whom this program would not run as effectively as it does. This year, even during the pandemic, we have a brand new relationship with a Chinese university, and 9 students in one cohort from that university in professional writing. So it's, here are the students from the Chinese program in the concentration that we developed a few years ago. So, and that's just been wonderful to see.
That's fantastic. Well, before we go, I have to ask, because there are 2 questions I ask everyone who's been on this podcast. 2 main questions that really have nothing to do with anything. I find them to be fun and interesting way to end the show. The first one is, what is your go-to meal to impress? You don't have to cook it, but what is your go-to meal when you're trying to impress someone that you go for?
That I'm trying to impress someone. That's wow. I can think of a go-to meal, but I don't know if it's going to impress. It's would have to be Thai curry. While living in Asia and traveling a lot in Nepal and Thailand, trekking in the Himalayas and so forth, and Korea and all over, I really fell in love with Thailand. And of course, that always confuses people. I lived in Taiwan, and I had an aunt once introduce me at Christmas dinner. So this is Brad. He lives in Thailand. Different country. But I fell in love with Thai curries. This coconut curry, and I'm vegan. I have been for about 8 years. I haven't eaten meat, eggs, or dairy in a long time. So I usually do it with tofu, also bamboo shoots, and maybe water chestnuts and so forth, and straw mushrooms. And it's spicy. I mean, if you make it right, it packs a kick. But it's also got coconut cream in it too, so it's a real thick kind of meal. And over rice, it's heavenly.
That sounds very good. You'd impress me with that. I'm just saying. And then the second one is, we do a lot of public speaking. And I know, I'm not perfect. I've messed up. So I want the worst public speaking moment of your life, but I don't need full details and explanation. I just need 3 words. For example, mine is high school appliances bleach. Is my worst, and there will be no follow-up question either. So it's just 3 words or phrases that describe your worst public speaking experience.
Wow. 3 words?
3 words or phrases.
And I don't need to explain it.
And nope, there will be no follow-up question.
Okay. Mispronounced Chinese. Vulgar.
All right, and there will be no follow-up question to that. Well, Dr. Lint, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Drew. It's been fun.
Absolutely. And thank you all so much for tuning in and listening. And make sure you come back for another fantastic episode of Conversations. Thank you so much for listening.